Howdy. Thank you all for being here. So, a little housekeeping. First, can we do some kind of sound connection check with folks online just to make sure they're hearing okay? Especially Jose and Diana and the group in Kingsville, who have convened an in-person event in Kingsville to join this as a group down there. So, Jose and Diana, thank you very much for doing that, and want to absolutely make sure that you guys can hear us. Any thumbs up from the back of the room? Crystal, can you? Crystal, can we? Are we getting at least some sense that online can hear us? All right, great. We had some slides cycling earlier, so I think we've got some cards around. Our Innovation Forward conference is in 3 weeks. If you haven't registered yet, hopefully at least consider doing that. If you're an employee of Texas A&M, it's free. If you're not an employee of Texas A&M, it's not free, but it's still a really good value. So, 3 days of some really great speakers and great content. As part of that, we'll do some tours of RELIS. We're also going to do a tour. I don't know how many of you know that Texas A&M has a functioning nuclear reactor. It's not hooked up to anything, so no power is coming out of it, but it's a 33-foot deep swimming pool that's got a glowing blue thing at the bottom. That is a nuclear reaction happening. And so as a guy who grew up inside the 10-mile circle of 3 Mile Island, that was just cool as hell for me to see that thing. And so that's something you can sign up for as part of our Innovation Forward. You have to sign up for that one soon. November 4th is the cutoff because we need to do background checks for anybody to go into that facility. So if you have interest in signing up for that as part of the Innovation Forward conference, please take a look at that. And the speakers there, ExxonMobil, Halliburton, Texas Nuclear Alliance, Sante Ventures, Deloitte. I mean, it's a long list. And the speakers are online. It's a good and growing list of speakers. And so please take a look at that. And the best place to find information is the website anyway. I saw earlier we had our sponsors listed on the screen. I don't know if there's a way of pulling that back up again. As a reminder, a little bit ago, we switched to annual sponsorships so that we, in the past, we used to have a sponsor for this event, and that just felt not very respectful to the people that we engage with all year round. And so really greatly appreciate these groups as not just, clearly sponsoring. I think you get it. They give us some money, but it's really about the collaborative work we do with them throughout the year. So I really appreciate that and others. So today's topic, I think it's a great topic, name, patenting, and publishing. It's not one or the other. This is a conversation we've had in all different kinds of forums, and so two great, accomplished researchers and commercialization people. If you've been to our events in the past, we've had some presentation. We're just going to skip over that for here, and so we're going to go straight to just introduce yourselves, please. And as part of that, just give some background about your research and some flavor of the kind of work you do in both the publishing side and the patenting side, and however you want to think about describing that.
Okay. So I'm Gerard Coté. I'm a professor in biomedical engineering and been here for a long time, about 33 years now. My focus area is really biosensors. And so we do lately a lot of handheld and wearable sensors. So think of the Fitbit only for health on the wearable side, and a handheld device, maybe with a paper fluidic or a electrochemical kind of sensor, that type of thing. And so we do those to monitor your health. And so that's kind of what I do. My background is electrical engineering undergrad and then biomed for master's and PhD. And like I say, I've been here in biomedical engineering. I've also spun out a couple of companies, I guess 6 now, but 3 I still talk about. The other 3 kind of went downhill, but one got bought out by Medtronic, so that was a success in the optics area. So and the other 2 are still viable, Biotechs and Visualase. So yeah, we've been able to balance the commercialization with the academic, all the things you need to do, publishing and all that kind of good stuff, research, service, and teaching.
I'm Cynthia Hipwell. I've been here for a little over 7 years. But prior to that, I spent most of my career in industry, and most of that was at Seagate Technology, making recording heads for hard disk drives. So a lot of my first patenting was at Seagate. I was in the tribology area, which is study of friction and wear. So looking at how the head and disks contact and keeping them reliable. So have a bunch of patents in padded sliders and novel air bearings to, pressurize quickly and load and novel actuator concepts. And so that was very important for our business. We had a technology leadership business. And so keeping and protecting, investing in and protecting our technology was important. So then when I came to Texas A&M, I pivoted to the tribology of the finger device interface for haptic devices. So the create touch-based effects. And so that's where most of my research is right now. We also look at the robotic hand, so not just human hands, but robotic hands and how tactile sensing and robotic hand characteristics affect grip and dexterity. So that's where I have some patenting here in that space as well. And so that's, yeah.
Thank you. But so, as I said, it's the topic patenting and publishing. But part of the motivation for having this discussion at all is that we've had lots of feedback from folks that see publishing and patenting as competing or diluting of each other, and so both of you are here because you have your demonstrations that that's not the case. And so, can you let's just start by confronting that. Talk a little bit about how you've been successful, how your career has benefited from these things being complementary of each other, not competitive with each other.
Okay, I guess I'll start again. But yeah, so they really are now. I can't say 33 years ago they were. I think I came into it the same kind of fear that a lot of assistant professors come into it with, that, hey, if I patent, it's going to hold up my publication and I'm not going to be able to get the pub out, and I need the pub to get tenure and all this kind of good stuff. But now it's fairly seamless. Back then it wasn't. Actually, it's a bit challenging. 30 years ago, and partly with Pete and his team. Back then they called it a technology licensing office. Now it's a technology commercialization office. Sounds like a name change, but in reality, it's a way of thinking change, right? And so back then it was a bit of a challenge because it would take so long to get the patent filed, and they had to go through all these hoops, and everybody had to approve it, and you had to get your department head, and you had to get your dean, then you had to get everybody all the way up the chain to just approve to file. And but now that is not the case, and that hasn't been the case for, quite frankly, a couple of maybe a decade or so. So now it's fairly straightforward because you can file, you can get the patent filed relatively quickly, a couple months, and on publication terms, that's pretty short time frame, especially because you're already thinking about it. And so as long as you think about it ahead of time, I think that's the main thing. Is trying to get ahead of it and say, okay, yeah, we're going to want to file this publication probably in the next 6 months. Is there anything patentable? And that's what I ask my students a lot of times. Okay, I know you've got this publication coming up. Is there anything patentable in there that we want to file, before you start writing it? Once you have the publication already written, that's not the time to start thinking about whether we should file a patent. You should think about that at the time you're collecting the data, right? And or whatever it is that, if you're computational or whatever. But at that time, if you do it then you got plenty of time to get the patent filed, work with Pete's office and get it all done. And they're really complementary because you can get one done well before the other one. And so I think it's a myth that was founded in reality 30 years ago. But I don't see that today. And I think, I don't know that it's not unique to A&M, but it's certainly not an issue here anymore.
Yeah, I've had the same experience as Jerry with the patenting office here. None of our publications have been held up, and actually, considering the speed or maybe lack thereof of patents that I did at Seagate, I've been very pleasantly surprised with how things move, and also how good the first drafts are from the lawyers. So if you guys are online, sponsors, good job. But as long as I think we've even given some things pretty close to when we're ready to publish them, and they've gotten the disclosures out pretty quickly, and so it hasn't impacted our publishing at all. And in fact, I would say, people if we're doing something that's really high impact, if you're looking to get into something like science robotics or something like that, science robotics doesn't want to just see a technical idea. They actually want to see it demonstrated in a robot, right? And so a lot of these high impact publications are looking for something where you've demonstrated impact. You've not only discovered something breakthrough, but you can show it all the way through in a device. And so that's where I think this can be very complementary. I think it brings some additional credibility to the work if you can say, hey, we have a publication in science and a patent, right? I mean, it says a lot about the importance of the technology and the idea to people just beyond a publication. And so I think it can really complement each other and say something about your work.
So great answers. Jerry, first of all, I wasn't here, but I still want to apologize that you had a bad experience in the past. And you don't need to have a commercial but I'm pleased that you're having a better experiences now, of course. I mean, is there anything you guys would think about telling yourselves, the earlier versions of yourself, to sort of set your mind at ease back then based on what you know now? Is there any version of that, or is it just, this is not something to be afraid of, just go do it? I mean, is it that simple, or is there anything more to it than that?
Well, I think I always look for the win-win. And so from my perspective, it complements and benefits, the career development. And so at the time, like I said, it was a little different time 30 years ago here at A&M, where they didn't know how to mitigate conflicts and those types of things. Now they've got it down on how to do that. And so, as long as you're not negotiating for either the company or the university, you're pretty safe. You let, Pete's office negotiate for the university, let a company negotiate for that. So on the patent side, when you file the patent, I think it can be very complimentary, as Cynthia said, but I think perhaps more importantly is it can drive your research, because you do want to show that it is not only an idea, but it's something that you can implement. And so from that perspective, if I had to go back, I would say, yeah, this is really the right. I mean, I did it tentatively a little bit and said I even took a sabbatical before I got tenure to go work for a small company, which was crazy. And my department head and dean told me it was crazy, but I did it anyway. And then I came back and I had the bug to start my own company. So I think, but the patenting, I think, all plays into that, because you then can use that idea, and you have to show efficacy, and then it, like Cynthia said, it becomes a better publication, and it opens up the door for more funding, which is something I think we'll talk about a little later.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Jerry, because and I apologize for framing the narrative as this is about going from patenting as being a negative, and the success of this conversation is getting to neutral. And so, because there really is, so if we can talk a little bit more about how patenting can be a positive, right? So it's not, so we're going from people who in the earlier career versions of yourselves might be included in this, where patenting was seen as with some anxiety and how it would distract from your research career, to some neutral state where fine, it's okay to do it, versus have you seen real places where it is really now helping? And again, back to counseling the early version of yourselves, say this is a way of having patenting accelerate my career in some kind of way.
I think that just in general, being in connection with industry problems, part of my early career self was in industry, but I guess you consider when I transitioned here 7 years ago, it's a little bit my early academic career self. And so one of the things that I did was looking for interesting, how was I going to pivot, what was I going to work on, what was I going to leverage from what I did in the past, and what was going to be something new, and getting in contact with, we were getting a little deeper discussion with industry, and then working in some of those problems and then growing it. It really became a very fruitful area, not just for industry funding, but for what you write in even like an NSF proposal, because you can really say why this crazy technology I'm working on is going to be important. It helps you frame it better. And so I think that the work that I did, first work that I did with the company was just a collaboration with the startup, and I used my startup and they used, they did their part. So there's no funding, but it blossomed into all kinds of NSF funding because we were working on interesting problems. And so I think just that process of looking at why your technology is important, talking to people about who care about the commercialization of your technology, about why it's important, can actually help you frame your proposals much better and have a much higher success rate with the funding.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, again, I'll compliment Pete's office, particularly Shamala. I got to give a shout out every time I get up in front of anybody. She is fantastic. And why do I think she's fantastic? Because she challenges me. She's like, well, what do you use this for? How is this different than these other 3 patents? How is this different from this article I found? And, some faculty, I guess, take offense at that, but I look at it as a partnership, and she's making me stronger in exactly why it's beneficial. And then that, exactly like what Cynthia said, that you could use that in your grant, right? If you have to explain it to her, then I can use that later on and say, yeah, this is why it's better. This is why it's better than the state of the art. And then, that's the introduction to any grant proposal that you would write to NSF or NIH. So that's the one clear benefit, because they're testing you is, does this have a market? Does this have a potential to be different than what is out there and what is the state of the art? So I've been able to leverage that into my grant proposals, and that's been a real win-win. The other thing it is now NSF at least has this innovation ecosystem, and so that's part of the broader impacts. And you can say, that I contribute to the innovation ecosystem because I'm patenting, and I'm trying to mentor my students to patent, and teaching them to say, hey, let's look at the patent first, and then let's do the publication. So you write it in a way that says it not only doesn't inhibit, but it actually, like you said, it enhances what you're doing, and in both in terms of your research, because it makes you stronger and your conviction of what you're doing is really cool, but then also in your mentoring, I think, because it gives the student a different perspective on not just looking in the literature and trying to do, maybe some fundamental research, but translational research, and why are you doing what you're doing and what's the impact.
Well, please, no, yeah. You guys can talk amongst yourselves. I'm just, that's just fine. Please go.
One thing that as Jerry was mentioning the innovation ecosystem, it made me think about, actually both of us are involved with engineering research centers, and those a lot of these large grants require, number one, specific ones require a connection to industry, and that they're specifically looking at doing, leading edge research that translates into get into industry. But also, when you're trying to make something work or thinking about how it does work, you actually by necessity need to bring in kind of multidisciplinary other people to work with you to look at that whole system. And I think that can also lead to some collaborations that can really grow some of the larger grants that really a lot now want something that's several people coming together to kind of investigate a system. And so I think it can help you build that for your career as well.
Yeah, I think the other real win is the storytelling. And I tell this to my students all the time. What's the storyline? What? Tell me the story. And I just keep reiterating that. And that's what this really does, is it helps you lay out the story of why this is beneficial, what it's useful for, and who wants it, who needs it, who cares, why do they care, and all of those things come across when you ask, when you get asked those questions about a patent, and then that can get then translated into a publication, and so that I think it helps you complement the storyline, and then it gives credibility, as Cynthia said. We both have these ERCs, and if I have never filed a patent and never worked with a company, I'd have zero credibility as a director of this ERC, because they're going to say, well, you're missing an entire pillar, and so it really is beneficial.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Donnie. It's nice to meet you guys. And I appreciate your earlier statement saying that these two subjects weren't juxtaposed, because that's kind of how I was thinking. Are we going to patent? Are we going to publish? And with some of the clients I've worked with in the past, we always want the patent as we go out to raise funds, because it's much easier to get a commitment and get a check if you have something patent and defendable. The publication piece of it is critical, because I see it transition into the actual business process of the business development piece, because you generate your marketing, you generate your sales from those publications. It's great you've got a patent, and they'll typically say, hey, that's wonderful. How is this being applied? How is this going to make a difference? So I think the two are very important together.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, both in industry and in academia. I've talked to several companies. I work with, probably 100 companies or more now, but, a lot of small businesses, and the timing of that publication becomes really critical, because it is a marketing tool. But also, when you get a publication, you try to get the leaders in the field, right? If in my field, it's biomedical. So we try to do the clinical studies with Methodist and these docs that are well known for their research. And so then if you can get them to do the study with you, and then obviously you're just it just makes it more credible that they're.
What always happens is you get that check on Monday, and on Tuesday you get a phone call and say, okay, what's the revenue?
Right.
So you've really got to make sure that there's two together. So if I'm going to invest in something, it's great to see I've got some fodder that I can pass along to the teams to begin to generate a return on my investment.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So Chris, I see you have a question. Just hold that for 1 moment. So this event is not meant to be an overt commercial for our office. It's meant to be a subtle commercial for our office. But I'm going to follow up, Jerry. And right. Yes, we also love Shamala for exactly that point, is because she's a great embodiment of our office functioning as partners with you. And that's what we want everybody to think about our office, is we are not the policy police. We're obviously knowledgeable about IP policies and are here to protect you and the enterprise. But we're here to be your partners in creating value. You are the research experts. You are by definition, the most knowledgeable human being in the world about your research. That doesn't mean that you also, just because you're smart doesn't mean you're a commercialization expert. It's not like you can't figure it out, but we have a team of people that this is the careers that they have pursued and have that expertise. And we have a team of of additional resources supporting them. So thank you for that. But I also just want to take that moment. So go ahead, Chris. What's your question? The online question.
So this is a question from Lauren online. To what extent do you find that it's a risk to discuss the technology and process of being patented? Is there a chance that someone can copy and also patent similar technology?
Yes. So it depends on what's meant by discuss. That's part of why you want to be in contact with the patent office. So as an example, I have a patent here with one of my colleagues, and he was getting ready to go present that at a Gordon Research Conference. And so he went and made sure we got the disclosure submitted right before he presented, so that you do not, it is first to file now. So your little notebooks that used to lock in when you invented it don't help anymore. So it is important to lock in that date with the disclosure, but then the disclosure does lock that in as long as you complete the patent. Am I saying everything correctly?
Keep going.
Okay. Just want to make sure I'm not giving incorrect advice. So that's why it is important, I think, to talk to the office. So you can say, I might be discussing it here. I might be discussing, with somebody else, so that what you get the right protections before you start discussing it.
To make it clear, a patent is a very public document. Right? I mean, that is the definition of the deal that was established in the Constitution of the United States. Is this country has it from the founding fathers that we, as an innovative society, we want people who invent things to be able to share them with society for society's benefit. But you can't share, what's the incentive to share that without some protection? The deal that was struck was patenting. And so in exchange for sharing your invention with the world, you get 20 years of a temporary monopoly to exploit that. That's what the patent is. That is your temporary monopoly to go exploit that. Your ability to prevent others from practicing what you have established through the patent office is novel, useful, and what's the third one, Craig? There's another test there, right? Novel, useful, and whatever. So anyway, but yes, so to answer the question online, patenting is very public. Doesn't mean you still don't need an NDA, and Cynthia said it very well. If you do it in the wrong order, if you publish and then try to patent, that doesn't work, because you have already let, open Pandora's box, and you can't put the stuff back in. So you have to patent it first, and we can do that very quickly. If you said you're going to a conference on Monday, we could take your presentation, put a cover sheet patent, provisional patent on it. We could file that tomorrow, so the contents of your presentation on Monday would be protected. But if you do it the other way, if you present it and then come to us, you do in fact retain U.S. rights for 12 months. But the moment you say you present that without patent protection, you forfeit your rights around the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's something that I didn't know. I guess when you're talking about your former self, I was pretty naive and quite frankly stupid when I was started as an assistant professor about a lot of these things. Well, about a lot of things in general, but I was 28, so I knew it all, slightly past the teenage years. But at any rate, the idea there was I didn't realize that, because when I filed my first patent, they said that I was infringing, and I said, infringing on what? And they said, this article, and it was my article, and I'm like, how can I be infringing on my own article? And they're like, it's not that it's that it's now public domain. And so and I actually, we had to explain this to a senior faculty at one point, because they thought if they published it, then everybody could use it. I'm like, well, if you publish it, then nobody can use it, because you don't have the patent. Exactly what you were saying earlier. If you don't file, then nobody's going to invest, because if it's public domain, they know anybody else can use it too. So why would I invest in something that somebody else can now build as well? So that took me a little while to realize that my own work infringes on the
Well, yeah, I think the right word there is it's prior art against yourself, right?
Right.
So is if you publish something, we submit something to the patent office, we're required to submit everything that we know that's in the prior art, and then the patent office will do their own searching and find more prior art. And so what happens is that novelty claim, that novelty test that has to get passed to get any claims to issue, is it novel compared to the universe of prior art that the patent office finds? And that can include your own stuff, right? So again, if you get this out of order and you publish first and then you try to protect it, you won't be able to, because you said you've already disclosed this to the world. And to Jerry's point also about needing patent protection to get things to the marketplace. And I want to come back to this in your guys' experience about bringing things to the marketplace and how that's a passion of why you do research. If you think about drugs, right? I know drugs are like Pfizer drugs, not like on the side of the street kind of drugs, right? So like, those companies are going to, what I've heard is the cost to get a drug to market is somewhere between $1 and $2 billion. Well, somebody's investing that. Maybe it's super wealthy Pfizer company or somebody else, but there needs to be some return on that investment. And you say, well, okay, if I'm going to spend $2 billion or spend $1 billion, then you get a $2 billion back. That should be good. The problem is, it's that plus the fact that a very incredibly small percentage of the things that start eventually are successful. So not only do you have to pay for that billion that it took to get that one, you have to pay for the risk of all the other things that failed along the way, right? That's the return on investment of the investors, because they knew it was going to be investment, then it's a loan, not a true investment. So that's why the drug, patents related to drugs are so hyper important. If you were to have literally the cure for cancer, I know there's no such thing, there's just so many different kinds of cancer, and you publish that before you protected it, it's a good chance that you just spoiled that from ever getting out to the world. Because who's going to go invest, short of Bill Gates or somebody else just doing it out of philanthropy? Federal government won't do it. Who will invest the $1 billion+ to bring that to market, knowing full well the moment that it proves that it's successful, every generic company can just can undercut you, right? That's why drug prices are so high, because those companies are recovering their investment. And the moment that thing comes off patent, the generics are teed up, ready to go, and the prices go down by a factor of 10 or whatever it is, right? But yes, there are elements of the entire drug market that are skewed and whatever. But if there was no patent, there would be no new drugs. So maybe following on that, you guys both are examples of bringing things to the market or thinking about things coming to the market. So talk about how you as research, how that's drives your passion as researchers, and how patenting is in some ways a piece of that, or maybe get off the whole patenting, just how you think about bringing your research to market.
So for me, getting things out into the world is important. It's part of why I decided on the path that I went down originally, and part of what I enjoy here. And so I consider the commercialization, whether kind of regardless of who does it, maybe it's not me taking it out, but maybe it's some students taking that out, or we license it or whatever. Getting it out into the market, to me, is part of the impact, right? I want to see it change something, see it have a big effect on the world, or be able to say, hey, look at my thing at Best Buy or whatever, right? So for me, being able to see it really manifest in a real product is exciting, especially for products that require advanced technology. And you could say this wouldn't even work if we didn't discover this, right? This wouldn't exist if we didn't discover this. And so for me, it's a big motivation. getting things out there.
Yeah, I mean, it is my primary motivation right now since I started my first company because, again, being in the biomedical device space, there's nothing like a patient that, we've got stories that we talk about. So the first product we did was a fiber optic that went into the head to cook a tumor under MRI guidance so that you could predict the zone of damage to within a millimeter. And it was mainly to do cancerous tumors, but then a doctor used it off label for epilepsy on a patient. And it was a teenage kid up in Dallas, actually, that was seizing 3 to 5 times a day. The drugs weren't working. So the next thing was they cut the skull, they flip it open, they cut out the part that's bad, and then they have to flip all that back, sew it in, big old scar. So instead of doing that, they just put a little hole in his head, cooked the part that was damaged, and the kid has been seizure free now for years. And so, so not only great for the kid, but the parents are like, I can drop him off at a birthday party now, and I don't have to worry about him seizing and then, basically ruining everybody's time because other kids don't know what's going on. And, so it's stories like that you say, oh, wow, and so it kind of ranks right up there when I was first looking at publications, and publications are nice. And I thought, oh, I got a really high impact factor publication. And I told my parents about it because, again, I was 28 when it happened, and I was all excited about it. And then the news picked it up, and so I did a little story on the news, and then Reader's Digest picked it up. Oh my God. My mom, oh, you made it, right? You made it to Reader. She was telling all her friends, I'm in Reader's Digest. I had a little paragraph in Reader's Digest about that, and that made her day. But, because that's something that they read, not all these high journal publications. So the journal publications are great. We still do those. And I believe in really high impact factor journal publications. And I think that's really important, especially for the students. And I tell them that, it's more important for them at this point in their career than it is for me at my point in my career. But that idea of being able to commercialize, see those patients, actually hear those stories, and then now knowing that, the Visualase was the name of the company, got bought out by Medtronic, and now I know they're servicing globally people, and so they're making a huge impact. And I like to think I had a little bit to do with that, very little bit, because I had 2 great PhD students that did the bulk of the work. And so they're the ones that really helped commercialize it. But at any rate, so for me, yeah, that is something that we really want to look at, and it really makes a big impact.
I'm going to ask you a question, Jerry, as a follow-up to what you just said there. That is, if it's something you don't want to talk about, just let me know. Off-label use, question from the audience about being able to leverage publications versus regulatory clearance, and and again, you get some, can you talk a little bit about that and how publications, even so, we're talking about patents not undermining publications, but let's talk about the other side, how publications can be instrumental to helping commercialization, right? And so, was that off-label use published, and therefore you were able to use that in marketing, even though it was off-label in some kind of way?
Yeah, I mean, that's when Medtronic got really interested, because they're now like, okay, and it's not just for tumors, but it's, we can use it for these other applications as well. And so yeah, that really helped, I think. And so again, a lot of it's timing. When do you file that publication? And because you don't want to do it prematurely. If the data doesn't look good, then it could tank your company. But if the data looks good and everything looks promising, then, and you want to work with people that are going to publish the data, whether it looks good or it doesn't look good, right? I mean, if it doesn't look good, publish it. Yeah, it may not be good for me, but I think we need to let people know, because I don't want somebody to go down the wrong path and kill somebody because I didn't publish something that was bad. So I think, they don't do enough of that, in my opinion, anymore. They used to publish bad data as well as good data, but at any rate, I think it can really enhance the commercialization factor if you do it right, and everything starts to look good and that type of thing. So at the right time. And
you can use a publication as, you can present that as a form of marketing. You can't overtly market that as an off-label thing. I mean, that's the definite. Companies can't market off label, but you can say, here's a publication, right? So
Yeah. And we're trying to use it to get money too, because you can publish, like we have a phantom system in our lab, and we strap wearable devices on it, and then we move the phantom up and down and do fake blood through it and all that, and see which device works best. And so we want to publish a paper in that space and just say device A worked the best in presence of motion artifact, device B, and then list that, in no particular order, A, B, C, D, are Fitbit, Samsung, and then hopefully then they call us up and say which one was ours. And well, I can give you the raw data, but let's talk about a research contract. So so
being a good
that's
salesman.
another way to sell it, right?
So there's another question online, but hold on. So Jerry's response, Cynthia, makes me think about your experience in industry. Talk a little bit about, again, we're evolving off topic, but the tempo of industry versus academia and the pros and cons on both sides.
Yeah, so it's
Maybe not pros and cons. It's a differences.
it's different. So it is much faster, and part of that is the business need for that, right? You've got competitors. You're trying to get things out faster. Some of it is your employees don't have to take classes at the same time like graduate students do, and also some of it is the scale. If it's something that's been invested in and this is needed, the resources that can come to bear are often much more significant, and so that can really, really push things along. But time matters in industry, right? If someone else gets a product out, or if you're not keeping the evolution, if you're in something like microelectronics or disk drives or something where there's a Moore's law or a Kreider's law or something that you need to keep advancement at a pace, when you innovate matters. And so the pace it's much faster. And so it kind of helps you focus on what are the questions that are really going to answer what I need to know to learn if this works. And some of that, I think, can even then have a benefit in your research in academia, right? That you kind of, what are the most important things here for me to learn and discover?
Yeah, I'm not a researcher, but I've been in and out of the large not-for-profit and the small for-profit. And I have felt that people consider the small or large for-profit as not rigorous, not high integrity, willing to do whatever they need to do. And certainly there are for-profits that are that way. But talk a little bit about just, and maybe I'm looking for the answer, is to dispel that myth, unless you believe that is true, right?
Oh, no, actually, I would say complete opposite, because if you put out a paper and you haven't looked at all the reliability impacts or all the, there are certainly people who put out papers that device probably wouldn't work in the real world, right? But you have to have if you don't have integrity when you're working on something in industry, the lack of it working in the market will catch you, right? And so there's no way to lie, because the customer is getting your device, will tell it all. And so actually, because you might have to get a 10,000 to work or $1 million to work, there needs to be a lot of integrity and rigor and digging into quite a bit of depth into those problems, because you need to really understand everything about your product to know I have confidence in this getting out there to work. So I actually, one of the things I did at Seagate was I had a team. They had me create a team that the whole job was to dig into fundamentals and understand failure modes, like kind of from root cause and the physics, because they felt the only way we could prevent them was by understanding them and being able to engineer them out. So I'm not, not every company or not every business has the same need for technology driving it. But I would say that those that are technology driven, it's both, it can be a great combination of both exciting and just as rigorous, if not in some ways much more rigorous than what we need to do in academia.
Yeah, I would echo that. And I think the key point there is technology-driven companies, whether it's, commercial off-the-shelf kind of technologies or biomedical technologies, but the rigor obviously in biomedical industries is even higher because of the regulatory requirements. You can't just get it to work once and then publish it and then expect it to work the same each time, every time. You can do that in academia. You can't really do that in industry, but you can build a better toothbrush and market it really hard and make it purple with the old Pokemon or whatever it is you want to put on there to appeal to children and get it to work really, really well, or get it to market really, really well. But it's not really going to be doing any harm, but it's not going to really do any good either. So there's ways to make money without really giving anybody any real benefit. The better toothbrush way is what I say. Is it really better? Yeah, it's a toothbrush, but it's okay. But on the technology companies, like you said, if the hard drive doesn't work, you're going to get bad reviews pretty quickly, and that company's going to either have to fix it or they're going to go under. And in the biomedical space, if it doesn't work, you can actually kill somebody. So it's pretty rigorous.
So I'm getting flagged. So we
got an online question for you.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh. If a graduate student only has patents but no publications, how will their career be affected?
Say that again.
If a graduate student has only patents but no publications, how will their career be affected?
So I could start with the first question I ask my student is, where do you want to be in 10 years? You can talk to my students. I've pretty much asked all of them that. And if their answer is academia, then that's devastating. If their answer is industry, it's probably not too bad. Although if they want to get a PhD, at least in our department, we require at least 3, publications from our students at minimum. And so they have to, there's the minimum requirement you have to satisfy to get the degree. And then after that, it's okay, where do you want to be? And if where you want to be is industry, then patenting is actually probably as maybe even more preferred than publications. But if you want to go into academia, I think you gotta have the publications. And I think the patents would be an add-on. It would set you apart from a typical academic. And so I think, but having only patents, if you want to go into academia, I think at this point, the culture is not there for that. And I think you have to have publications, and you have an added advantage if you have both.
So we've got some questions in the room. I got one over here, but we got one over here first.
Can I add one little comment
please.
on that? Is that, I would think there wouldn't need to be a reason that a grad student had only patents and not publications, because, I mean, the lawyers can write the patent off of what is prepared for the publication. So there doesn't need to be you're going to write up enough for somebody to write a patent off it. You might as well finish your paper.
Right. Exactly. So.
Yes, I'm Ursula Serhan. I'm coming from a basic science department, so to speak. So patenting is very foreign to me. And so we had this situation with the graduate students. You mentioned that it's often the graduate students or the postdocs who are working on the work that goes into an invention and into a patent. How do you decide who gets on the patent and into what percentage they get on a patent?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm very open, very transparent. And so I start with the lead student that is doing the bulk of the work. And I say, has any of the other students worked with you on this? And if they say yes, then I'll say which ones. And then we get them all in a room together. And then we say, okay, we're going to file this patent. And it's just like a publication, honestly, because if you're going to be a co-author on a publication, or do you want to be an acknowledgement, or do you want to be nothing, right? Those are the three questions that I ask of the students. Did you do enough to warrant co-authorship? And so it's the same with a patent. Did you do enough to warrant a co-author on a patent? And so that's the first bar. And if you haven't, if all you did was what the graduate student told you to do, that's really not part of the intellectual property. But then once you've established that they've done enough, then it comes down to percentages. And every PI is a little bit different when it comes to that. Some PIs think I'm all that, and they want to have the bulk. I look at who did the bulk of the ideation, not who did the work of the, so if the graduate student came up with the idea kind of mostly on them, that I give them 60%. And then I'll give the other ones that have been co-authors maybe 5%, and then I'll take 20 or whatever. But so it really depends on, but I don't think that's the norm. And Pete can probably tell me what the norm is for filing. But I think for me, that's the fair thing to do. Get them all in a room and have that open discussion. One, do you think you contributed enough? And then two, if you did, then we talk about, okay, who had really the enabling, then you start talking about, and then I point to them a little bit. Okay, tell me exactly where you contributed. What did you do? Okay, what part of this write-up did you do? Right. And they'll say, oh, I did this. Okay, then what percentage do you think that warrants, compared to this guy who did all this, right? And so we have that honest discussion, and that's kind of the way I do it in my lab.
The other thing, by my understanding, and I guess correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that's very critical for a patent is anybody who's an author has to be responsible for at least one claim needs to be attributable to them in the claims.
Yes.
So if somebody just helped take some data, if they're not a contributor to the claims, I mean, there's got to be a tractable way, because you could lose protection for it if there's somebody who's just on there to be nice.
Yes.
So you got to be pretty strict about that.
So, I mean,
if they can show their people, like if it went to court, like if somebody infringed against it and you went to court, they might put all the authors up there and ask them, what did you do? What did you do? Right. And so you've got to be able to attribute that person really is an author to a claim.
These are great answers. And obviously these are the right people to have on here. I'm not a patent attorney, but I've done a little more than stay at a Holiday Inn on this topic. Right. So I want to decouple two topics. One is inventorship in the patent law from revenue distribution and IP in our IP policy. Patent law states that only the people who contributed to the issued claims are allowed to be named inventors. And Cynthia is 100% correct that if you ever have a patent that is attached to a valuable technology, there's a good bet somebody will challenge it, because they're going to want to sell a product that competes with that, and your patent will be blocking them. And the most common way the patents are invalidated is by inventorship. And you can invalidate a patent by either leaving somebody off that should have been on there, or including somebody that should not have been on there. And so so from the patent law perspective, if you have 20 claims in a patent and somebody contributed to all 20 and somebody contributed to only one, they're both named inventors. There's no percentages attributed to that. It's not like a 5%, 100%. It's just, it's a digital thing. You're either an inventor or you're not, period. You talk about percentages, that comes in our world, that is how revenue is distributed. IP policy, 37.5% goes back to the inventors. It's for the job of the inventors to figure out how that 37.5% gets divided amongst the inventors. If there's two inventors, it can be 50-50, it can be 99-1. we, the innovation office, really require the inventors to tell us how that should go. And Jerry and Cynthia and Jerry's, talked about his example, and, no surprise that he's a very decent, generous guy about this, but however the inventor group decides to distribute revenue, that's where I think the percentage comes into play, because on the patent law side, there is no percentages. You're either in or you're not. And it's not, and Cynthia said it perfectly. If you don't get it right, and this is really something that your patent attorney should be, just like Jerry said, testing the everybody that's on there, and also testing the lead inventor to make sure nobody's getting left off because they hurt somebody's feelings. That will lead to bad things. So we got one over here first.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna play devil's advocate. And first, I want to say Pete and everybody have been very helpful, and I'm still in a very steep learning curve. But I do have patents already approved and some pending, and I've came across these. Oh, it's easy to publish a patent at the same time, but I don't find it that way because, for example, if I have a grad student that is only on a master's, he generates preliminary data. He says, okay, let's publish so I can get my one publication. I said, no. The data is still too preliminary to publish, and we're gonna run into problems with our patent. And so I'm guilty of that, holding publications or giving my students the reward of the publication So I think it's not as straightforward as it might sound, but I might be doing it wrong, or my area of research takes longer than in engineer or robotics or something to proof of the concept, and more than just proof of concept, but have something, a solid base of what you're patenting.
But wouldn't that be an issue too, that you didn't want to publish preliminary data that might give away your idea, even if you were just publishing?
It does, because then you don't want to give the recipe to put it out there too early, because then
even if you weren't patenting, though, that would probably be the case.
I don't know. This is what I have, we have encountered in my area, and that's not just my feeling. And I do have it. I have publications still, drafts in my, and probably some of you too, in my desk. And then also, there has to be a better way of A&M, and they actually have through your office, of recognizing these students and waiving the publication requirements. For example, some of our departments do that. Okay, we're gonna waive your publication requirement because I know there's a patent pending, but still I feel that, I don't know,
Yeah, the reason I haven't come across that is because I, when it's a patent disclosure, right? And so you just need to get the filing date. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then you have a year to collect all the data. And if it takes you longer than a year, then that could be problematic. But for me, it never takes me longer than a year to figure out whether it's going to work or not work. And that could be a function of it being an engineering problem and not a biology problem or something. I know people that work in biology and they grow cells, and 3 months later, all of a sudden they all died and they got to start all over. But in engineering, it's a pretty straightforward process. We figure it out. And at the end of the year, again, Shyamala puts my feet to the fire and says, are we going to file this? Or are we not going to file this? And I've often said, no, the data doesn't show that it works. And so I thought it was a great idea at the time, but it turns out it wasn't. And so I think she appreciates that. So then when I do say, no, this is really good, let's file this, then she files it usually and agrees with me, because I'm not afraid to say, no, don't file it. But that could be a function of the thing. And so, yeah, if it takes more than a year to figure out whether it's going to work or not, then that could be problematic. In which case you either have to make the decision, okay, well, but then again, why are you publishing it if you don't know if it works, right? So you shouldn't be holding up a publication, because if you've got enough for a publication, then you should have enough for a patent. And if you don't, then that means that you're maybe not publishing in the good journal, or you're not, or whatever it is. I know you can publish, and like I said, I publish in Reader's Digest, but so I don't count. Well, I do put it on my resume as news, not under refereed. But at any rate, I do think that that it, like Cynthia said, they kind of go hand in hand. And if in reality, in my opinion anyway, if it's not good enough to patent, then it's probably not good enough to publish. And so then the student doesn't get a publication. And if that's your department's culture that they need one, then maybe that's a problem, particularly for masters.
So they have to have, are you talking about their dissertation, or you're talking
first author publication? And again, like experiments in the animal work doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes you have to wait 2 years to see if it protects, or if it actually cures, or if it does everything. So it does take a long time to get the data for registration, product registration, and everything too. So yeah, and what you said is true. You ask your students, what do you want to do when you finish? But the reality is they don't know. A lot of them, they don't know.
Oh, I
If
know.
they want to be
Yeah.
in industry or in academia, and
And that's okay. And that's why I tell them, but we're not locking you in here.
exactly.
I had one that started saying, I want to do an MD. A year later, she said, no, I don't want to do that. I'm MD, PhD. I'm just going to do the PhD and go into industry. I don't want to do anything else. And then 3 years later, she's like, I'm definitely going to academia. So, and that's okay. But I tell them that I'm giving you the experiences that I think you need for that particular occupation. And often what they find out is they don't like it, right? And so, and that's okay, because I said it's more important to find out sometimes what you don't like than what you do like, right? Because and so if you hate patenting, then probably you're not the person to be an entrepreneur, right? Or start your own company. If you hate publishing, then you're probably not right for academia, right? So finding out what you don't like, I guess, is almost as important as what you do. Masters is tricky though, because it really is a very short time, and very often, very rarely have I had a master's student on a patent, except as a with somebody else, a PhD student patent. But I have had undergrads. I've had one undergrad was on it, and he got royalties before he left. So that was really good for him. But he ended up going to MIT or whatever, doing his PhD. So he was a star student. But yeah, so I think it really depends on the nature of the work. But it'd be interesting to see what you're publishing that you think it's worth publishing, but there's not enough data there for a patent.
There is enough data for publishing in a high impact journal, not in but still you don't want to publish it out there with all the compound A, B, C, D.
Right, but what I'm not understanding is if it's a good enough for a good high quality journal, then the data you're putting in there should be good enough for the patent. So why not file the patent, then the pub?
Exactly.
Right? And so I don't see how they conflict, I guess, is my point.
Looks like John Crescione wants to help us out here, maybe.
I do agree with you somewhat, because there's a 20-year life on a patent. So if you do this, if you go to the patent right away, right, and then the publication, you may have done it too soon. And I only know that because I have some patents that are expiring. I'm kind of old. So at the time I submitted them,
kind of.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
But you can also, as you improve it, you can have new
right. And there's other ones that have
patents
come in, but I've been hesitating. So I've been hesitating now, to wait till it's a more mature, and I'm actually ready to hit the gas. So
the only thing I'll say about that is that just by the nature of how innovation works, I definitely recommend How We Get to Now. It's an awesome book, and also on TV. But things get invented when there's enough discovered to have that thing be invented. And so if you are working on something super cool that you think you're the only person working on it, there are probably guaranteed at least 7 to 10 other people doing that. And so there's the time if you hold too long, somebody else probably goes down this.
Well, at Seagate, when would you pull the trigger? Right.
Oh, we would pull them right away.
Yeah.
As soon as we because.
But it's only if you were going to go forward with that product, right? I mean, if you wouldn't patent anything anyway that you weren't going to go forward with.
Actually,
or just
on the contrary,
yeah.
because some of the things that are most foundational, we don't actually know when we're going to use it. We had, as an example, we had a patent for a little heater actuator that ended up being the entire way you could control spacing. It was invented many years, like it was invented 4 or 5 years before we ever even tested it out in a product, right? And so it was probably one of the most important patents Seagate holds. And they didn't know if we would ever, we knew it was important capability to have, but it didn't become something that we used until we couldn't do it without adding that device anymore. So we often patented things before we knew that we would for sure use it in a product.
Yeah, I guess I work with students that want to go into industry or in academia. I just let them know ahead of time, right? Which projects to work on. So say, look,
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is
academia,
I probably wouldn't
like,
put a master's student on something that I think is going to generate patents, right? Because
No time. Yeah.
There's not. Yeah, I mean, the level of breakthrough that probably needs to be patents. I mean, I don't know. I find that it needs the cook time of a PhD. But
We have another question over here.
So I've got about 4 decades of experience in product development, and we do it on outsourced spaces for other customers. My question really is I struggled for all these years as to how to name patents, because the inventor, the customer, startup, this is mainly about startups. Our larger customers are much more, like I see it, we've much more experience, know what to do, and they don't need our help in that. But the startups, all the inventors, and their brothers and sisters want to be in the patent so they can say, I'm on a patent. And that's exciting. We try to help them understand that, no, that's not the right way. When we get a patent attorney, they usually help, but I struggle with that. And then also, where does their invention come from? Obviously, the people come to us with the idea. So the idea is novel, we believe, and that's why they're getting a patent. But the tech to actually make that novel idea work, like you said, on a claim basis, that usually comes back to the engineering side of how. They tell us what, and we tell them how, and it's the how that's patentable, not the what. That's hard to explain. And then along with it, it's also sometimes hard to get the customer to understand that our engineers need to be on the patent. They're like, well, we don't want to give you money. We said, no. Our contract says we assign all patents to you. So all intellectual property from here in eternity. So we're not taking money from that. He who pays owns. That's our rule. But I guess do you have any other thoughts about how do you convince those startups, not the big guys, how to, what the ownership is? And you kind of said it, but maybe you have some other thoughts about that. Who should be on the patent
if someone contributed and they're not on it, you can lose in court.
Yeah, but I tell them that, but I contributed. It's my idea. I've got this, gizmo, and they've invented it. Well, they've come up with the idea, but the idea, it requires a microprocessor and this and that and 20 parts. And the claims read a microprocessor with this, and this, and a dependent claim of, and it includes a red LED that blah, 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 etc.
So good engineering is not the same as is inventing, right? And I'm an engineer, and I have tremendous regard for engineering. Enabling something is not the same as, I pulled it up while I was sitting here. I'm not surfing the internet for other things. So the tests for a patent are useful, non-obvious, and novel. And so those are the tests that the patent office is going to apply to all the claims that you have against all the prior art that they can find, and to determine if the claims that you are trying to get pass those tests. And so there's lots of good engineering, right? I mean, to be able to apply good engineering practices, not everybody can do that. And there's some people that are really, really good at that you'll pay a lot of money to do that. But that's not, lots of times that's neither novel nor, I mean, they're following guidelines and books, and they're doing things that other really good engineers would do if you paid those people the same amount of money. So that's, I think I've experienced that lots of times where you engage somebody, they make lots of contributions, but their contributions are sort of follow the script engineering kinds of things, not the inventive who really contributed. And some of that should get sorted out into, as you said, what the final claims are. I mean, and that will depend on, it's not the same as what the claims issue or what claims you submit. That's why inventorship is really something that should get reviewed again, at least at when the patent's ready to issue, especially if the claims change meaningfully.
Didn't mean to say or suggest that we did want our customer's name on the patent. We absolutely, I mean, we're not, none of us in our company are trying to have our names on 24 patents or anything, even though we are. But I mean, it's not a game for us. It's not a game for the customer. We want to make sure they're on there, but sometimes there's 3 or 4 owners of the company, and there's 2 that had the idea and are really great, and maybe the other 2 are owners only because they wrote a check, but they're not inventors, and it's hard sometimes to tell them that story. But
let me ask a quick survey of this room. I do a quick survey of this room. So we're in the second year of doing this. I think our first or second one of these was an IP, a patent discussion. You know, the entire discussion was about patent. We had a patent attorney and I think another faculty. Would show of hands, how many people in this room would value another deep discussion about patenting? Hold your hands up again.
Yeah, I can never get enough of patenting.
I'm seeing a third of the room maybe. So all right, we'll put it back on the cycle, but not expedited on the cycle. So
Maybe you can modify it instead of saying patenting versus publishing, patenting toward commercialization.
yeah,
Kinda
some of the
cover it,
mechanics of patenting, right? Because
Yeah.
I think we're getting a few questions here about the mechanics of when things publish, the timing of these things. How do I mitigate timing concerns about publishing something versus getting something into a patent issue? Anyway.
So I would say for a lot of those questions too is talk with your counsel and let them know exactly what's going on so that they can help you transition and publish or non-publish and those type of things. Question, what is your thoughts on patents, which are very public, as you explained, you know, you're listing everything, versus holding back a trade secret or a corporate secret? Do you ever find yourself debating and trying to figure out, I don't really want them to know this part, and how do you reconcile that?
How we did it was, if you can tear apart the product and you can tell that you can detectability, you can detect that there was infringement, then we patented. And if you couldn't, and that would usually be design. And if you couldn't detect, say there was a process, how you manufactured it, we would usually trade secret that, right? If you couldn't tell how a diamond-like carbon layer was deposited, we didn't patent our diamond-like carbon process, right? So that's kind of how we did it, was detectability, that you could tell from their product shipping that it was infringed upon. So
I think that's the best answer I've ever heard to that question. So
oh. If you're yeah, then you're actually not, you do not want to tell people how to do it. But we did list them as trade secrets because then you can protect it against people who leave your company and tell someone else how to do it. You can prosecute against them.
Could we touch on the non-obvious aspect of the test for a patent? Because as Dr. Hipwell mentioned, some ideas become very obvious once the technology to do it comes into place. So it might be obvious, but it might also be novel. So I wanted more insight on that as well.
Yeah, so that's, again, this is going my point about maybe a discussion like this, and maybe we can talk offline, because this is the details of how a patent gets issued. Non-obvious is usually somebody of reasonable skill in the art of, and it's not the leading experts, but you'll have a negotiation with the patent prosecutor, the somebody in the patent office. And if you've never submitted a patent, the first time you submit a patent, you're going to be so proud. You file the patent, and it's going to have 20 claims, and the patent office is going to reject every one of them, right? And that is just what happens, and that's part of their job, right? There's occasions where you get things allowed the first time, but they're going to say, here's some things, and then you have this negotiation of explaining to them they rejected it for this, and then you say, no, you're wrong because you misunderstood something, and use lots of wordsmithing, and that's how claim language gets incredibly long and incredibly precise, because it's negotiations between your patent attorney and the patent office about exactly what you're allowed to claim. Because eventually, as I said, if your patent is ever worth attached to a product that's selling for something, that language will get dissected by the word about what somebody else is allowed to do or not allowed to do. And so that's a deep discussion that we really should have some patent attorneys up here. And I don't know how many patent attorneys are in the room, but we can get a few to talk to you about that, the details of non-obviousness, and how to think about overcoming that rejection. I apologize if that's dismissing your question. It's just, we're coming up on time. I mean, it is actually leading us down a detailed discussion about patenting. So we'll get you the answer, but there's one more over here. And I think we're tentatively thinking about wrapping this at around 6 o'clock. Was that the plan? 6:10. All right. All right. We'll keep going.
It'd be interesting to get the speaker's comments, but getting back to the trade secrets, I just wanted to just do the reminder that at a university, there really are no trade secrets. At a company, there can be trade secrets because you can protect it. Since the whole goal of research at university is to publish, you can't really have trade secrets.
I see their comments are their heads nodding up and down. So for the record, I will put it verbalized that, go ahead. But
Yeah, you can't officially have them, but I've seen a lot of faculty that just don't, the publications now, you can get away with a lot more than you used to 30 years ago when people actually published what they did. A lot of times I have to actually go to the dissertation to find the real information, because the publication is, one, briefer, but two, they don't disclose. And but in the dissertation, a lot of times the students will put in the appendices what they really did, as opposed to what was said in the paper. And so, yes, theoretically, you can't do a trade secret because you have to publish it. But I also have seen a lot of publications out there that don't tell you the whole story. And so to me, that's almost like a trade secret, but where they just withhold the information until they can patent it or do whatever they want to do. But yeah, I don't know of anybody at the university level that does trade secrets.
Yeah, you can't declare it, but you can decide whether you say it or not, or decide whether a patent is a recipe, right? So a process, you may not want to do a patent that tells everybody how to do that.
So when you publish your results and your data in a dissertation for a master's thesis or a PhD thesis, does that count as a publication if you present your data at a conference in a poster form, or if you have a public defense of your project? Is all that considered publication for everybody else to know?
Yes, conferences for sure. That's a public disclosure. Anytime that it's public, it's a disclosure. Now, when it comes to defenses and thesis, you can hold your thesis for up to a year, I think it is.
2
years.
2
So you
years
can hold
embargo.
back your thesis for 2 years where it's not published. And so that gives you some time if you want to file a patent or something. But the PhD thesis is supposed to be a public disclosure. So you have to do something if you don't want it to be a public disclosure. But theoretically, the PhD level, I don't think that's true for the master's, but I know for the PhD level, you have to actually post it. Anybody's allowed to show up for the public part of it. And then there's the private. Yeah, then there's the private part. But you can ask for it to be private, but yeah. Yeah. So you have to get all that approved from the department head and why you're making it private and not public. Because university standards are it should be public. So that's a problem.
Any version of sharing the information with anybody that's not also employed by your same employer that does not have a non-disclosure agreement, or a confidentiality agreement, kind of the same thing. That's a public disclosure. If you go to dinner with somebody and you tell them, then that's a public disclosure. It could be just you and somebody else at dinner. And again, I come out of healthcare, it was a classic that company X would take a surgeon out, or orthopedic surgeon out, spend $1,000 on a dinner, put enough wine in them, and they'd share all sorts of interesting ideas. And for, whatever portion of $1,000 that surgeon consumed, they own those, they've got access to all that ideas. It's public. And the doctor can get pissed off about, you stole my idea. It's like, well, you told me, right? That's, and so, yes, any version of sharing your information without it being protected, again, and the exception to that is if this room was full of only employees of Texas A&M, then we're safe, right? Because everybody in here would be okay. If there's one person in here that's not an employee of Texas A&M, then we have just had a public disclosure of what we presented. And we could solve that by saying you're only allowed to come through the door by being a Texas A&M, or you have to sign this confidentiality agreement.
Do you think we need to do that if somebody's spouse comes to the dissertation defense?
Technically, yes.
I mean, if they don't actually go use the idea.
Right. If it's what is the real impact of the disclosure?
Yeah.
That being said, if it got revealed at some point that somebody's not covered was, presented with this information, if somebody again down the road was trying to invalidate your patent and said, I know that let's say you and your spouse and went to a dinner and then you got divorced and they were in a or just whatever, or intellectually very pure, and somebody figured out, somebody could invalidate the patent, says, no, that was publicly disclosed before it was filed, and therefore it's not patentable. I mean, that's, it's incredibly unlikely, but that's so. But, and again, the point being, if there's any version of public disclosure before you file, you immediately forfeit all foreign rights and you have a 1 year to protect your U.S. rights.
But I'll just say, from a practical standpoint, this is what we do, right? So the students I don't want to start working on a patent when they're gone anyway. So we decide what's going to be patented, both before they publish and before they graduate. So we make sure those things get submitted. So then that would be before their defense anyway. And then we pretty routinely embargo anything that's device related. I think actually all 3 of my graduate PhDs have been embargoed. So that's what we do. Just, be conscious before they graduate, and then you'll know if it's
And
what
also
could be in there.
I've gone to future work, how some students like to say, and this what needs to come next, We don't do that anymore in my lab. There's no future work in the dissertation. If you want to write down future work, write it in a notebook and leave it to the next student. I think that's useful, but because they're covered under the confidentiality because they're your employee. But we don't put that in publications anymore. We don't put that in because future work, then somebody could claim, oh, that's enabling, even though it really isn't, but somebody could make that claim. So so just in the publication, there's no reason to talk about what you might want to do in the future. You just end it with, here's the conclusion, here's what we got, here's our results. And the same thing with the dissertation, but that used to be really popular, and it may still be in some fields today that, a chapter on future work. But we don't do that anymore, at least not with my group.
Another thing too, I know at least during COVID, like one of my old interns when I was at Ohio State, when she was doing her defense, since it was on Zoom, you could also do it on Zoom, like her family, like all her parents and other family members, were able to attend it that way. They probably would not have attended had it not been for Zoom. So that's another thing to think about too, when you're doing these types of things over Zoom, then a lot more risk now for public to be on it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, that's why it's either good to file ahead of time, which is what we both, I think, do, but also there's no reason for the public part to be disclosing everything either. So that also could help because, but that is weak because they'll say it was, but yeah, better to file before.
Real quick, because I know we're trying to get out. How strategic are you on choosing your publication where you want to publish? Let's say that you choose, I would really like to publish here. It doesn't get accepted. You go to the second one, and maybe that doesn't get accepted. Is there a point in time that you might want to pull it back because if you get put in this lesser journal, a journal that's not quite as focused on your subject matter, it can actually hurt you? What are your thoughts about that?
I'll let Cynthia answer from the industry perspective, from the academic perspective. No, I've not done that. We've always been able to go top journal first, second tier journal, second, third tier journal. Usually by the third tier journal, it gets accepted. And so, and it's still a good journal. I'm not going to go down to 1.0 impact factor, probably just because I don't think it's good for the student. But yeah, we typically, and a lot of times it's just not the right subject matter for that particular journal at that particular time. And so, so going to a different journal that is more appropriate is typically what happens. But, but I leave a lot of it to my students, and some of them are in the back there and they can tell you, but, I let them pick how high of an impact factor you think you can go with this one. And then we try to go with that. And then, but then we also have that secondary journal in mind, in case the top journal doesn't accept it right away. But yeah, but we typically shoot for a particular impact factor, and we don't usually go below a certain journal type in our group. But there's enough in the horizontal direction with that impact factor to be able to find usually something that will take it.
So